Welcome back to episode 5 of Address the Yes, where you guys ask questions in the comments and I answer them as best as I can. And without further ado, let's get on with the first question here from Haru. He's asking, now that you're back in Australia, how do you feel about the crashing prices of parts, I guess used parts, over here compared to deals in Japan from a few years ago? And that's a very good question because the two markets are very different, I feel. Like Japan, for instance, there was a lot of good deals on just random parts, and I feel like there was a lot more variety in Japan as opposed to Australia, where there's a lot more better deals, I guess, on mainstream parts like i5s, i7s, even Ryzen 1000 series and GTX 10 series cards, for example. And so the two different markets are different, but ultimately I did, in hindsight, enjoy Japan a bit more because it was just more, I guess, you could spot out those bargains easier, as opposed to Australia. At least now in 2018, it's a lot more saturated. I also feel like in Australia, a lot of people would just chuck these parts out if they were too unique and they just put them up for sale and probably no one wants to buy them. As opposed to Japan, they just offload them to the junk store and then they reflip them for 1,000% profit, but still nothing because they give the person 10 cents for it and then they sell it for like $1 or $10. And sometimes you can really pick up some good gems. But also on the flip side, in Japan, for example, if you've got a miner who's offloading 10 graphics cards, he will generally not sell them to the public, and he'll just go to a store and trade them in and be like, yo, take all my graphics cards. And then that store will then sell them for pretty much close to retail. So in a nutshell, I think in Australia you can get better deals on mainstream stuff, and in Japan you can get better deals on sort of more niche type products. Next up, Tech Canuck says, how do you prefer editing your videos? I'm using Davinci Resolve. I'm finding it fairly dry to edit videos because there's lots of cuts I'm needing to do. And a little bit of a sillier question, how do you do but text in a video? Do you just add text into the timeline, or do you use a clear screen and add text on that and put it in the timeline? So I haven't tried Davinci Resolve, I've tried Vegas. And there's some things I like about the software other than Adobe, but when it comes down to it, I work so efficient in Adobe. And because I got to get a video out every day, I literally tried these other editing programs and I just can't use them. I can't get used to them because I'm so used to cutting videos in Premiere Pro that I couldn't use anything else. Even though Premiere Pro is, I believe it's a ripoff. Like, they don't improve the software properly. Like, it crashes still. And the randomest crashes. You try to import something, oh no, you get that circle. So if you're using Adobe Premiere Pro, if you're using any video editing software for that matter, do put your autosave on like 1 or 2 minutes. I find that alleviates a lot of frustrations. But in terms of adding text into the timeline, yeah, we just press the T button when we're editing and we'll just add text and then we'll make it all fancy. You can add effects to it. And so that's pretty easy to do. I don't use After Effects pretty much at all, but I know some other tech tubers out there do. Next up here we got SJ. He says, have you had any issues with any Pascal cards where when using any DisplayPort connector, it will cause artifacts when booting or using the hardware button to restart the PC? In my case, the HDMI connection is fine and there are no issues when using it compared to the DisplayPort. And when in general use after boot, using it with the DisplayPort is fine. I checked the cable with DisplayPort on my motherboard and it was fine, and I don't know what else to try. Any help would be great. In terms of connection ports, the only issues I've had in the past is either one of 3 things. A, you've got something broken on the graphics card itself, or something's faulty, and that's causing the artifacting. 2, it's either the cable and you've said it's not the cable. Or 3, it's actually the port itself. So in the case of this, for example, I picked up some mining cards recently and the HDMI signal just wouldn't come out of one of these graphics cards. And so what we needed to do was just quickly reinsert the HDMI cord like 100 times and it started working again. So it might actually be the port itself, maybe it has a little tiny speck of rust on it or something like that. So you might want to check that out. Try reinserting the DisplayPort cable, yeah, maybe 50 times. See if it fixes it. Next up, Lex CZI says, what's up with the constant crackling in this exact video of yours? So he's referring to the previous episode, and unfortunately during that episode, my audio interface, it's rest in peace. It's unfortunately, we tested it out after that episode and we found it was not the mics, because we've got 2 different condenser mics. It was actually the audio interface that is unfortunately on its way out. And I love that audio interface because it's got a compressor built on it. So they're getting really hard to find, and I picked that one up on a bargain for like 20 USD. So It's painful, don't worry, it's painful, but we've fixed it now. Next up here, Ernest1027 says, have you ever had to help a customer troubleshoot their PC after you sold it to them? Are you responsible for maintaining the PCs after you flip them? And yes, we've actually had quite a few times where people buy them, and it's a lot of the times it's simple things, like they'll plug the DVI cable or the HDMI cable off the motherboard port instead of the graphics card, and they'll be like, why is the FPS so low? So we help them out with that. Sometimes it's a rarer issue where it's actually the customer's fault, where they'll actually blow up the motherboard by sticking a USB port in a HDMI connector or something. I've had that happen once. But other than that, yeah, of course, I provide support. If someone's buying a PC off me, I provide them support, because if I bought a PC off someone and I paid decent money, I would want them to help me out if I had a problem. You got to put yourself in other people's shoes. It's like a lot of people buying PCs off you are buying them because they don't know how to build PCs. So if they come into any trouble, it'd just be a good thing to help them out. And in turn, that gives you good word of mouth, helps your reputation. And I guess a good rule of thumb is, I mean, I offer 3 months guarantee on my PCs, but of course I don't guarantee user error, which does happen. So in the case of the person blowing up their motherboard, I charged them for a new motherboard. Next up, we got Roman Bachelor. He says, what car are you driving at the moment and what are you looking to buy? I'll answer the latter. I'm not looking to buy any other cars at the moment. I have a car that I really like at the moment. The Astra broke down, that was my previous car. And now I've got something that I'm writing off against the business, but I'm gonna reveal that in an upcoming video because I love this car. It's really cool. People who've met me in real life know what it is, and I got it for a really good deal as well. So I'll spoil it in a video. Next up, Rax, he says, need more budget PC Aliexpress Xeon hacks. Videos, yes man. Much love from Sweden and much love to Sweden. Talking of Xeons, we've got a lot in the works for Xeons. We're talking X58, X79, might even try some other stuff. People are recommending I buy some Aliexpress boards again. We've already tried one boards, but there's some other cool, unique niche sort of boards out there. So we'll definitely give them a look, try them out. But yeah, stay tuned. Make sure you sub with those notification bells turned on because you're not going to want to miss some of the content that's coming out. No other channel is going to do anything like this. I promise you that. Next up, Leaky Space Boots says, Brian was wondering if you have considered having a few automotive based videos. I remember a video that was posted about 2 years ago where you were talking about a car someone let you borrow. You seem to be very interested in cars as well. Used car hustle time. I think you might have been talking about the Lancer. That was my brother's and he sold it since then. That was a very fast car. It had a lot of modifications done to it. In terms of cars, I do have a history with cars, especially growing up as a teenager and in my young 20s. Lots of history to it, but unfortunately I feel like now in Australia, driving a modified vehicle is just not worth it. Police will defect you if you get pulled over. Statistically, you get pulled over a lot more than you would just driving a normal car, normal looking car. It's just really, like we call it in Australia, a cop magnet. And it's just sort of ruined the fun. Back when we were like teenagers, it was so much fun driving modified cars. Nowadays, I think the scene has definitely sort of dropped off a bit. And so it's more of a, I guess, you've got to look out over your shoulder. And it's like, look, I get enough stress having to keep up the workflow. I don't need stress when I'm out driving my car. But since a lot of you guys do seem interested in cars, then I'll definitely make a video on my current car for you. And also in that same video, talk about my history with used car parts hustle. There is some history there, don't worry. Next up, Faf Dus. He says, how do you like your X79 system? I desperately need to know. Not gonna really spoil the X79 video, but I'll give you a teaser. It is my main video editing workstation at the moment, and I absolutely love it. That's the 1680 V2, which is a very rare breed of Xeon. So yes, I can recommend it, but don't go out and overpay for some of the motherboards and CPUs and parts. Next up, Southern Cross Tech says, hi mate, just wondering what microphone are you using for these episodes? Also, are you recording the audio direct to the camera? So usually I've got two different setups for my microphones. On previous episodes of Address the Yes, I'd be either using a Behringer B1 or an MXL, I think it's V67G, and that was going through my audio interface, and that's since broken down. So we're now using my lavalier mic, which is a Sony Lav Edge, and that's plugged directly into my Sony A7S II. But usually I love recording audio direct into the source because I hate syncing up audio with video post. It's so annoying for me. I don't know why. Some people can do it easy. I really don't like doing it for some reason. So next up, Tom Martin and Excalibur, they both talk about the coil whine and crackling in the video. We addressed that earlier. It's fixed now, don't worry. Thomas Williams says, hey Brian, loving this series. My question is, what's a good way to keep a brushed aluminium case looking good? I've got my Ryzen system in an old CM Wavemaster, which is still going strong. You guys should know the answer by now. Bit of degreaser or multi-purpose spray, a data vac, and also a rag as well. Does help get the dust off. And if it's that dirty, really dirty, then you may want to even consider some brake cleaner. But there's also aluminium polish if you want to go that extra step. I've never actually used it on a PC case before because the other ingredients have worked so well. Next up, we got Lewis Field here, says, address the yes. Is FX 6300 still worth it in 2018? And also a Corsair 650M, a reliable power supply. The CX650M, I'll quickly answer that. I haven't had any problems with CX series power supplies, nor for that matter have I had any problems with Corsair power supplies in the past. We've even used like VS350s on builds that we've sold here in Oz, and they work absolutely fine. Some people have reported though that the CX series, I think it was the first generation, weren't that good. So depends on what series it is, but for what it's worth, I haven't had any bad experiences with Corsair power supplies, so I'd recommend it if the price is right. In terms of the FX 6300, is it still worth it? You've got to give me a price point because it depends. Is anything worth it? It all depends on the price, really. If you pick up an FX 6300 for cheap enough, like $10 for example, I'd say yeah, it's definitely worth it. Next up, we've got Paul Z. He says, been a sub since 2016 and love the channel. Thanks a lot. And also I was wondering what your thoughts are on the tariffs that have started in the USA on Chinese products. Do you think Aussies might be affected at all? Thanks and keep up the great work. In terms of my thoughts on the tariffs itself, it's one of those trade-offs. I mean, you guys have Donald Trump as your president at the moment, and it's a very touchy subject. It looks like the statistics for unemployment and all the economy is going very well, at least from what I can tell. I don't live in America, but what's the trade-off? You've got to pay higher prices for local goods. It is painful, I know, but if people who don't usually buy luxury items are better off as a consequence of that, then maybe that's better for the greater good of society. Again, it's a touchy subject and there really is no band-aid solution for it, so it doesn't matter which way you go, there's going to be pain. Either you sell out your country to China, or in the long term you try and fix it but face the short-term pain, and that's higher prices of local goods. In terms of Australia being affected, that's really not going to happen because we import a lot of our tech products from either China or Taiwan directly. I believe from Taiwanese companies direct to Australia, there's no import taxes like GST. So in terms of Aussie prices, you may see them even being cheaper than that of the USA, at least in the next year. And I know a lot of companies that want to sell to Oz will go from China to Taiwan and then export their products now to Australia to avoid those import duties. So it's definitely not bad being in Australia for tech products. As much as people have whinged about it, the prices are pretty good when you look at the fact that the Aussie dollar is weaker to the US dollar. And we already pay 10% GST when we purchase from a retailer. Next up, Phony B, he says, what is the best bench testing software programs you use, mate? I have Nova and Cinebench. What else do you recommend? Thanks, mate. So in terms of benchmarking, there's so many different programs you can use. For me personally, if I had to only pick two benchmarks to use, that'd be Cinebench and also Firestrike. Firestrike's really good. It gives you a GPU score, which I find is very accurate for giving you a broad measure on how games will perform with that particular graphics card. And also Cinebench, of course, is going to give you that max theoretical score on how it's going to perform if a game was perfectly threaded, but also you've got the single threaded score, which will tell you if the game is only single threaded orientated, it'll relate very well to that single threaded score. So they're the two programs I mainly focus on. Of course, when I'm testing CPUs, there'll be a lot more synthetics like 7-zip, Blender, and all that other stuff that I'll throw into the mix for you guys. But they're the two main ones that I have that I always rely on if I'm doing a used build or I'm stress testing something and I want to make sure it's running 100%. Next up here, we got Frigo. He says, hey Brian, question for the next Address the Yes. What do you think about the ASUS RX 470 Mining Edition with only one DVI output? Would you buy it, and what would you pay for it? Also, there is any chances of soldering a HDMI to it? I can't find any detailed photos of the PCB. I actually never knew there was an RX 470 mining edition with only one DVI port, but as with anything, is if the price is right, then yeah, go buy one. Depends on how much it's coming under retail. If it was like only $10 under retail, I'd probably go for the one with the extra ports, because in the past I've actually had a graphics card that's had one DVI port blow out, but you've still been able to use the HDMI port, and it's a very weird problem. It's rare, but that being said, it is what it is. If the price is right, get one. Other than that, soldering on a HDMI port, man, seriously, I wouldn't try that personally. I just think it'd be a gigantic waste of time. Next up here we have Hydra. He says, hey, Peter Baelish, how do you stay so damn positive and charismatic in every video? Also, what have you done with Brian? Basically, Peter came in and he casted Brian off into Game of Thrones and did a switcheroonie because he got off. I didn't want to spoil it for you guys, but in terms of staying positive and charismatic, if you guys haven't seen the health videos we've done already, part 1, 2, and 3 is basically how I stay so positive. Definitely want to keep up your diet, definitely want to keep up your exercise, and I guess after you go through a lot of bad experiences in life, and I guess it's the mistakes that you learn from. Like, I've had a lot of crap happen in my past. If you guys followed me even through the YouTube days, there's just been crap that's been afflicted on me. And I know the thing is though, when I look at it now, even cutting my thumb up really badly, I'm still fine. Like, I'm still 100% healthy, and I'm just grateful for having the life that I have. And it's a real weird thing because there are a lot of people out there that have been afflicted with much worse than I have been in the past. My stuff is repairable. There's people who come back from irreparable things, whether you lose a really close one at a young age or you're permanently disabled. But a lot of these people I've met in real life, they're lovely people and they've still managed to enjoy their lives. So whatever you do in life, whatever situation you're in, try and make the most out of it, try and make the best out of it, and live the best life you can. And I guess maybe that comes through in the videos. Next up, Naish Gehring, he says, hey Brian, I have another question. I recently bought some RX 480s. When I put them in, I'm guessing when he turns them on and puts them in the computer, they all have error code 43. I've tried uninstalling, reinstalling drivers, but nothing has worked. Do you ever get error code 43? If you do, how have you fixed it? Thanks for the great content. I haven't seen error code 43, but we've had a very weird problem with RX 480s actually in particular, where you load up a benchmark or you load up Fortnite and the whole computer just switches off. And essentially what was happening was the software was locking out the RX 480 so it wouldn't engage the fans. So the temperatures are just stuck. And so the fans are just on silent, and then the card will overheat and lock in its hardware safety mechanism and switch the whole computer off. And how we fixed this was we installed Afterburner, set the fan speeds manually to either 60 or 80%, locked that into a profile, booted up with Windows, and then every time you boot up Windows, it's going to lock in a manual 60% fan speed, for example. And then when the games start playing, it's not going to matter because those fans keep spinning and you're going to have happy days. So try that, see if it works. That's the only solution I had for the cards that I had on hand here. Next up here, we've got Alessandro Falco. He asks, have you tried Aliexpress custom water cooling? I don't think you've done any water cooling ever since I started following you, but it would fit super well with the type of content you do. Definitely worth checking out. Thanks for your work. So quite a while ago, we did do an eBay water cooling loop. I'll put the link up here for that. It didn't turn out too well, even though it was very cheap. But we do want to step up the budget and I guess get some quality Aliexpress water cooling parts. But I will do that once we got ahead of schedule because I got this injury, but also we've just been bogged down with a lot of work. So maybe after Christmas, because I got to go to CES as well, after Christmas we'll get some really cool, interesting content like that, because I do have a lot of Aliexpress videos planned for you guys. Ordered a lot of cool stuff in. There's also some other really cool used price performance stuff coming. But also on that note, we've got Darth Jar Jar in the works. That is a custom hardline water tube build from Ethan from Tag Mods. We're teaming up and that is in the works right now. And speaking of backlogs, we've already done the health videos. So there's lots of cool stuff that I'm finally catching up on for you guys. And this one right here, Aliexpress water cooling, I'll get that done in say January or February of next year. Next up here, we've got Paradox Designs. He says, yet again, it's pronounced Zeus the same way Pegasus is said, as the company was originally named Pegasus. Basically, when it comes to it now, Google's algorithm actually recognizes it as ASUS. So when I start off a review of an ASUS product, I'm basically going to say, like, for example, today we're checking out the ASUS Strix 2080 or something like that, and then just revert back to ASUS because that's what I'm programmed to do, if that makes any sense. Because I've been saying ASUS since I was a teenager and I was using tech products. Next up here, Eric asks, hi Brian, is it true what they say about overclocking, that it may shorten the lifespan of your processor or GPU? Thanks man, love your channel, keep up the good work. It is true to a certain degree. It depends on who you're asking. Like, overworking any component, whether you're overworking a car engine or anything, will reduce the life. But in terms of CPUs and GPUs, if you're using your computer a few hours a day, like, I always overclock my gear, but I don't overclock it to stupid levels. There's basically sweet spot levels is what I call it, where you overclock it to a certain point, and after that you won't get linear gains. It'll start requiring a lot more voltage, and that CPU will just start hitting a brick wall. It's at that stage where I do recommend just taking it down a little bit and then just having happy days with either your CPU or your GPU, because not only will that reduce the heat, but it'll just help prolong the life of your components, because heat, in my opinion, is the #1 destroyer of PC parts. I've got lots of tutorials when it comes to overclocking GPUs and CPUs. If you want to check them out, then just go in the search bar, Tech Yes City CPU, and then overclocking tutorial. Hopefully something pulls up for you there. But in terms of overclocking, just make sure you watch your temperatures and have some good airflow, good cooling for your components, and you'll have happy days, because the extra performance is definitely worth it. Next up here, Elder Pass says, woo, first and RGB increases frame rates by 1000 FPS at 4K, so why wouldn't it sell builds? He's referring to the previous sort of episodes where I said that LED lights in your computers help sell builds. It's a little trick, and I can tell you guys they definitely do. But in terms of increasing your FPS, there's no factual evidence. I'm just going by hearsay. Next up, DIY Tech says, some years later we might be looking at RGB as neon undercars. I've definitely thought about putting some RGB under my car. That would be pretty cool, especially if you loaded up the IQ software. Could definitely get some cool effects going on. And then lastly, we got Inky Steve. He says, I'm 61 and I watch your channel when the nurse lets me. Make sure you say a big thank you to that nurse. She's awesome. And hopefully she lets you watch a little bit more Tech Yes City, because we're uploading every day. And with that said, if you guys have any questions or comments for the next Address the Yes, then be sure to drop them in the comment section below, and I'll try and answer them as soon as I can. And I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, then be sure to hit that like button. As well, if you want to get some Tech Yes City merch, then the link is in the description below. Or if you're enjoying the content every single day and you just want to throw $1 our way, then you can join Patreon, where you also get behind the scenes access to a special vlog every month. And all that aside, I'll catch you in another tech video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.